I am Maureen, a 38-year-old single mother. The biting wind of Aspen was nothing compared to the cruelty standing right on the wooden porch of our family cabin. My 10-year-old daughter was sitting on the ice-covered floor, her left hand desperately clutching her right shoulder. Her arm hung at an unnatural angle, and her face was pale from the excruciating physical pain. My father stood towering over her. He completely ignored his granddaughter's swelling, dislocated arm. Instead of calling for help, he pointed a stiff finger right in her face and yelled, "You will apologize to your cousin right now," he shouted. My little girl winced, using whatever weak breath she had left to fight back. "Why should I? He's the one who pushed me, causing my arm to be dislocated. In this family, my grandson has the right to do whatever he wants," my father declared firmly in front of everyone, shattering any remaining hope for fairness. The absolute limit of a mother's patience officially snapped. I had spent years paying the bills and keeping the peace, but watching a grown man demand an apology from an injured child was the end of it. I stepped forward, kicked the ski rack out of my way, and decided to crush his arrogant pride right there in front of the whole family. Welcome back to Revenge Mode. If you believe that blood relations are not a free pass for cruelty, and that protecting your child is always more important than keeping a toxic peace, hit that subscribe button. Stick around to hear exactly how I stripped away their power and made them pay for every single tear. The cruelty on the porch that day wasn't a sudden outburst. It was the result of years of silent enablement within this very family. As a single mother, my primary goal has always been to provide a stable, loving environment for my daughter. I worked extremely long hours to secure our complete independence. However, I also voluntarily carried a heavy financial burden for my father. I consistently paid his expensive monthly health insurance premiums. I covered his winter heating bills and property taxes without ever asking for a single dime in return. I justified these heavy expenses because I desperately wanted to maintain a strong connection. I wanted Peyton to experience the presence of a large extended family. I convinced myself that buying the peace was the best way to give her the solid family structure she lacked. Peyton has always been a gentle, quiet, and well-behaved 10-year-old. She follows the rules, speaks politely, and tries her best to avoid conflict. Unfortunately, her gentle nature made her the absolute perfect target for my 14-year-old nephew Bryce. His bullying was never a series of isolated accidents. It was a calculated daily campaign of harassment. Bryce routinely targeted her when the other adults were distracted. He would snatch her favorite art supplies and intentionally snap her pencils. He cornered her in tight hallways and shoved her shoulders hard enough to make her stumble backward. The psychological torment was even worse. He constantly used crude, nasty remarks to maliciously mock the fact that she did not have a father living with us. Whenever I caught Bryce in the act and confronted him, my brother Nelson immediately stepped in to shield his son from any consequences. Nelson absolutely refused to hold his boy accountable for any wrongdoing. Instead of correcting the aggressive behavior, Nelson shifted the blame entirely onto my daughter. "You are always overreacting," Nelson said to me during one of our heated arguments. "Boys just play rough. It's completely normal. Tell your daughter to grow a thicker skin and stop being such a crybaby over every little thing." He validated his son's cruelty by labeling it as normal behavior, stripping away Peyton's right to feel safe in our presence. The situation worsened because my father actively reinforced this toxic dynamic. His blatant favoritism was impossible to ignore. He idolized Bryce, treating him like an untouchable golden child because of his physical size and athletic achievements. He constantly praised Bryce at the dinner table, proudly referring to him as the future of this family. Conversely, his attitude toward Peyton was defined by cold indifference and frequent criticism. He viewed her quiet demeanor as a pathetic weakness. On several occasions, I heard him refer to her simply as the fatherless girl, a label he used to deliberately diminish her value. He made it crystal clear that a strong grandson held significantly more worth than a quiet granddaughter. Despite witnessing these deep-rooted issues for years, I made a massive error in judgment. I spent thousands of dollars from my own savings to rent the luxury cabin in Colorado. I genuinely hoped a shared Christmas vacation in a beautiful new setting might soften their bitter attitudes. I wanted to create a positive holiday memory. The night before we packed our bags, Peyton sat on her bed and looked up at me with absolute innocence. "Does Grandpa actually love me?" she asked quietly. That question shattered my heart. Instead of protecting her from the harsh truth, I foolishly wanted to give my father one last opportunity to prove his affection. I paid for the trip to give him a chance to be a real grandfather, completely unaware that I was leading my daughter straight into a violent nightmare. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Christmas Day, the serene quiet of the snowy mountain was abruptly shattered by a sharp, piercing scream coming from the wooden front porch. The sound tore through the cabin walls, carrying a level of sheer terror that instantly froze the blood in my veins. I dropped the coffee mug in my hand and sprinted toward the heavy oak door. Bursting outside into the freezing air, I witnessed the immediate aftermath of a brutal physical assault. Bryce was just pulling his elbow back, his weight shifting after delivering a massive, deliberate shove. Peyton had been thrown violently backward. Her small body crashed heavily against the rock-solid, ice-covered wooden floorboards. She lay there gasping for air, her face contorted in absolute agony as she instinctively curled around her right side. Bryce stood over her with a smug, satisfied smirk. He shifted his stance comfortably, showing zero remorse for the violence he had just inflicted on a girl 4 years younger than him. My father was standing less than 5 feet away. He had a clear, unobstructed view of the entire incident from start to finish. He saw the malicious intent in his grandson's eyes and the devastating impact on the hard ice. Yet he simply crossed his arms over his thick winter coat and shrugged his shoulders, treating the brutal attack like a minor inconvenience disrupting his afternoon relaxation. "Boys, play rough, Peyton. Get up and stop crying," Dad commanded in a cold, unforgiving tone. He looked down at her shivering form, completely devoid of any grandfatherly concern, and added, "You need to apologize to Bryce right now for standing in his way and ruining the mood." A surge of protective adrenaline flooded my veins. Without a single second of hesitation, I threw myself onto the freezing porch and dropped to my knees beside my daughter. I wrapped my arms tightly around Peyton's trembling body, shielding her from the biting wind and their hostile stares. I carefully inspected her right shoulder. The joint was already swelling visibly beneath her knitted sweater, protruding at an alarming, unnatural angle that indicated a severe dislocation. She let out a breathless whimper every time the cold air brushed against her skin. I kept my hands extremely steady, ensuring I did not move her arm and cause any further damage to the severely injured area. Seeing my protective reaction, Dad frowned in deep annoyance. He let out a loud sigh of frustration and stepped closer, reaching his large hands down with the clear intention of yanking Peyton up by her injured arm to force her to stand. I reacted purely on maternal instinct. I immediately shot my left arm straight out in front of me, locking my elbow to create a rigid, impenetrable physical barrier between his aggressive hands and my daughter's broken body. "Nobody touches my daughter. If anyone takes another step, I will call the police immediately." I gritted out through clenched teeth, maintaining a fierce, unwavering glare directly into my father's eyes. The loud commotion drew Nelson out of the cabin. He stormed onto the porch, taking one quick look at the scene before immediately defending his son's actions. Nelson pointed a furious finger at my face, loudly threatening to cut me out of the family forever if I dared to ruin their perfect holiday with my dramatic overreaction. I completely ignored his pathetic, empty threats. I did not waste my breath arguing with cowardly men who consistently defended violence against a defenseless child. I kept my left arm raised defensively. With my right hand, I reached into my heavy winter coat pocket, pulled out my cell phone, and immediately dialed 911 to request an emergency ambulance directly to our location. At 7 o'clock in the evening, the harsh clinical smell of antiseptics hit my senses the moment we entered the Central Colorado emergency room, blending seamlessly with the cold, sterile silence of the hospital corridors. The chaotic blaring of the ambulance sirens had faded, replaced by the rhythmic, terrifying beeping of medical monitors. The attending physician moved swiftly, examining the severe swelling under Peyton's torn sweater. He reviewed the rapid X-rays and grimly confirmed my worst fears. Peyton had suffered a severe traumatic shoulder dislocation caused by a massive, high-velocity physical impact. The bone was completely forced out of its socket, causing significant damage to the surrounding ligaments and soft tissue. The doctor explained firmly that they needed to perform an immediate closed reduction procedure in the trauma room to manually force the joint back into its proper anatomical position. My best friend Sarah rushed through the automatic sliding glass doors of the emergency department just as the nurses started hooking up Peyton's intravenous lines. I had called her in a blind panic during the frantic ride down the mountain. She did not waste a single second asking unnecessary questions. She immediately stepped in to manage the chaotic administrative mess. Sarah calmly took my ID, handled the complex insurance paperwork at the front desk, and signed all the preliminary consent forms. She also secured her car in the parking lot, assuring me she would drive us safely back down the mountain. Her decisive actions provided the exact anchor of stability I desperately needed, allowing me to sit by the bed and focus entirely on holding my terrified daughter. I sat on the edge of the stiff hospital mattress, wrapping my arms gently around Peyton's uninjured side as the heavy pain medication slowly began to take effect. The physical procedure was excruciating, but the emotional dam was finally breaking. Amidst her choked, agonizing sobs, Peyton looked up at me and made a devastating confession. She admitted that the violent shove on the wooden porch was not a random, isolated act of aggression. It was the brutal execution of a threat she had been living with for months. "He said he would break my arm if I dared tell you about him tearing my notebooks." Peyton trembled violently, heavy tears streaming relentlessly down her pale, exhausted face. Hearing those exact words made my blood run completely cold. The sickening realization of what my little girl had endured in silence tore through my chest. I pulled her small, shaking body closer, resting my chin gently against the top of her head. "You don't have to be afraid of him anymore," I stated with absolute, unshakable certainty, locking my eyes onto hers so she could see the truth in them. "I will never let anyone hurt you again. I promise you this ends tonight." A few minutes later, after the nurses stabilized her arm in a heavy medical sling and Peyton finally fell into a deep, medicated sleep, I stepped out into the quiet hallway. I pulled my cell phone from my winter coat pocket. The screen was completely flooded with dozens of unread text messages from Nelson. Every single message was a toxic barrage of blame. He accused me of deliberately ruining their holiday, overreacting to a harmless childish accident, and publicly humiliating our father by involving paramedics. Reading his cowardly, delusional words, a profound and permanent shift occurred inside my mind. My years of desperate endurance and financial appeasement had not protected my daughter. It had actively funded and enabled her abusers. Standing in that freezing hospital corridor, I decided that my silence was permanently over. At 8 o'clock the following morning, I sat alone in front of my glowing laptop screen with a bitter cup of black coffee. The time for crying and empty arguments was over. My mind was incredibly sharp, driven by a fierce maternal instinct to protect my daughter. I was entirely focused on establishing an irrefutable system of digital evidence against the people who had hurt my child. Because I was the sole primary account holder who had paid for and signed the holiday cabin rental agreement, I had full legal access to the property's exterior security system. I logged into the host's cloud portal, navigated to the exact timestamp of the incident, and downloaded the high-resolution video file directly to my hard drive. I made 3 separate backup copies of the file, saving them to external drives to ensure the evidence could never be accidentally lost or corrupted. Watching the crisp, undeniable footage on a larger screen was deeply disturbing, but it provided exactly what I needed. The camera captured everything with absolute clarity. It showed Bryce intentionally dropping his shoulder and driving his weight forcefully into Peyton. There was no accident, no slipping on the ice, and no ambiguity. It was a calculated, malicious strike, followed immediately by his arrogant smirk as he watched her suffer. I immediately compiled the digital video files along with the comprehensive emergency room medical reports and the doctor's official diagnosis into an encrypted folder. I forwarded the entire package to my lawyer, Mr. Davis, instructing him to prepare the most watertight legal case possible. I explicitly told him that I did not want to pursue any form of family mediation or accept any forced apologies. I wanted the law to handle them exactly as it would handle any other dangerous individuals. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Mr. Davis, and he had unexpected, highly valuable news. While he was conducting preliminary background inquiries to build our civil lawsuit, a completely independent source had come forward. Another parent from Bryce's high school had heard rumors about the holiday police call through the local grapevine and proactively reached out. This parent was more than willing to act as a formal character witness for us, heavily motivated by the fact that their own son had previously been a victim of Bryce's unprovoked aggression. With this crystal-clear video footage and a willing independent witness, we have incredibly solid grounds to involve the local police department and file a substantial civil lawsuit. Mr. Davis stated professionally over the phone line, "Proceed with every single legal procedure available to us. I want them to pay dearly for every single medical bill they caused my daughter to endure." I replied with absolute icy coldness. Mr. Davis then shared the disturbing details provided by the newly acquired witness. The information completely shattered the carefully constructed illusion of my nephew being a perfect, disciplined star athlete. According to the other parent, Bryce had a documented history of severe behavioral issues at school that my brother had desperately kept hidden. Earlier that year, Bryce had cornered a smaller classmate in the locker room and physically beaten him. The school board had issued a formal warning and subsequently suspended Bryce for a full week. However, Nelson had aggressively intervened. He hired expensive attorneys to intimidate the administration and utilized his personal financial resources to quietly settle the matter with the victim's family. He essentially used his checkbook to cover up his son's violent tendencies, allowing the boy to maintain his pristine sports roster spot without ever facing true accountability. Learning this hidden truth validated everything. Bryce was not just a rough kid. He was a protected bully, and Nelson was the enabler. At 9 o'clock on the following Monday morning, I executed a ruthless financial purge designed to permanently reverse the entrenched power dynamics within my toxic family. For many years, despite being subjected to constant disrespect and blatant unfairness, I had silently played the role of the dependable financial provider. I voluntarily carried the heavy, unappreciated burden of my father's living expenses. I dutifully paid his comprehensive health insurance premiums, his property taxes, and various auxiliary bills. I sacrificed my own hard-earned savings to ensure Dad could live a comfortable, stress-free life on his meager retirement pension. I had foolishly believed that my consistent financial generosity would eventually earn his respect and by extension secure a safe environment for my daughter. I finally understood that my money was only subsidizing his ability to mistreat us without facing any real-world consequences. Sitting at my kitchen island, I opened my secure online banking portal. The digital interface loaded quickly on the screen, displaying the various accounts and authorized user profiles I had maintained for years. My first deliberate action was selecting the supplementary credit card issued under my father's name. With a single satisfying click of the mouse, I permanently locked the card and officially revoked his authorized user status. I did not stop there. I meticulously navigated through the Scheduled Transactions tab. I aggressively canceled every single automatic monthly transfer set up for his utilities, his premium cable package, and his expensive supplementary prescription coverage. I systematically severed the financial umbilical cord, completely cutting off the steady flow of resources he felt so deeply entitled to receive. The immediate fallout did not take long to materialize. Early that afternoon, my cell phone began ringing incessantly, aggressively lighting up the screen with Dad's contact name. I let the first 3 calls go straight to voicemail, savoring the peaceful silence in my home. When the device vibrated for the 4th consecutive time, I pressed the accept button and put the phone on speaker. Before I could even speak, Dad's voice came blasting through the audio, growling with a level of furious indignation. He was standing directly at the checkout counter of his local pharmacy, completely humiliated by a rejected transaction. My card was declined at the pharmacy. "What kind of crazy game are you playing with my account right now?" he demanded loudly, completely ignoring the horrific events of the previous days and focusing solely on his immediate financial inconvenience. I did not raise my voice. I kept my tone perfectly level, steady, and absolutely freezing. "The person who protects the abuser doesn't get funded by the victim," I stated clearly, articulating every single syllable. "From today onward, you are entirely responsible for figuring out how to pay your own bills." Without waiting for his sputtering response or giving him a single second to argue, I ended the call. The harsh reality of the situation sent a rapid shockwave through the rest of the family. The sudden termination of my father's financial safety net instantly became Nelson's massive emergency. Barely an hour after I hung up on Dad, Nelson started frantically blowing up my phone. He quickly realized that the endless stream of free money funding his father's lifestyle, which indirectly eased his own financial obligations, was abruptly cut off. He repeatedly tried to call my personal and work lines, desperately hoping to negotiate a pathetic compromise or use cheap emotional manipulation to somehow restore the cash flow. However, every single frantic effort he made crashed directly into a solid, impenetrable wall of absolute silence. I deliberately opened my phone settings, selected their contact profiles, and permanently blocked both of their numbers, entirely removing their ability to access my life ever again. 2 weeks after the disastrous holiday vacation, the official lawsuit documents were served by a court deputy, and the heavy legal and financial consequences finally began to crash down upon the arrogant enablers. Based entirely on the undeniable security camera evidence I provided to the authorities, the local police department formally processed the assault charge. Given his juvenile status, the district court aggressively mandated Bryce into the county's strict juvenile diversion program. The non-negotiable legal ruling forced him to complete 200 hours of grueling community service and attend mandatory intensive anger management and behavioral counseling sessions twice a week. There was no more hiding behind his father's checkbook or his grandfather's misguided praises. The state judicial system was now holding him entirely accountable, forcing him to face the harsh reality of his violent actions. The severe consequences quickly extended directly into his school life. After reviewing the official police report and the extensive evidence package I submitted, the high school administration took immediate disciplinary action. The school board officially decided to suspend Bryce from all athletic competitions and extracurricular activities for the entire current academic season. He was immediately and publicly kicked off the varsity basketball team. This administrative decision instantly stripped away the prestigious athletic status that he and his father had always prized above basic human decency and respect. Facing my relentless civil lawsuit demanding full compensation for Peyton's massive emergency medical bills, Nelson found himself completely cornered. Without my financial padding to support Dad, Nelson could no longer beg his father for secret loans or bailouts. To avoid having his bank accounts frozen or his personal assets officially seized by the civil court to cover the incoming legal judgments, Nelson was forced to make a deeply humiliating sacrifice. He had to put his beloved expensive custom-lifted pickup truck up for sale. He spent his days frantically dealing with lowball buyers, desperately trying to liquidate his assets just to pay for his defense attorneys, and the impending mountain of medical debt. The financial devastation hit Dad just as hard. Without my monthly financial support covering his health insurance and utility bills, his meager retirement pension was drastically insufficient to maintain his daily life. He was abruptly forced to downsize his comfortable, carefree lifestyle, swallowing his immense, bitter pride. Dad had to formally list his luxury recreational vehicle for sale online. That massive RV had always been his ultimate symbol of success and freedom, a prized possession he loved showing off to the entire neighborhood. Now it was just another desperate casualty of his deliberate choice to protect a violent bully instead of his injured granddaughter. The absolute peak of their downfall occurred during a mandatory civil mediation session held in the sterile, soundproof conference room of Mr. Davis's downtown law office. The undeniable truth of the entire situation was laid out clearly on the large table through the detailed litigation documents, hospital medical records, and official police reports. Nelson glared at me across the polished mahogany table, his face turning bright red with desperate, unhinged anger as he realized he had zero legal leverage. "You're destroying our lives over one mistake. You are tearing this family apart." Nelson screamed directly into my face, completely abandoning any pretense of professional decorum or self-control. I did not flinch, and I did not raise my voice. I looked right through his pathetic, sweaty outrage. "No, the consequences of your own actions are destroying your lives," I replied, articulating every single word with absolute freezing clarity. "This family was broken the moment you enabled your son to hurt a child." With that final, undeniable statement, I stood up from my leather chair, gathered my coat, and walked out of the conference room. I left Nelson sitting in the echoing silence of his own self-inflicted ruin. 6 months after that horrific event, the house my daughter and I shared was finally filled with bright sunlight and an absolute sense of safety. The heavy, oppressive anxiety that used to haunt our daily lives was completely gone. Peyton had undergone months of rigorous physical therapy and fully recovered the complete function of her shoulder joint. She happily enrolled in a local weekend art class, spending her afternoons painting vibrant landscapes instead of hiding in her room. More importantly, the psychological wounds were healing beautifully. She no longer flinched in terror or jumped from her seat whenever she heard the front door open unexpectedly. The constant fear of being targeted had vanished entirely from her eyes, replaced by the calm, carefree confidence that a 10-year-old girl should always possess. Last month, we decided to take a short weekend trip to a local ski resort to celebrate her medical clearance. As we were walking through the crowded main lobby, we unexpectedly bumped into Dad. He was standing near the discount ticketing counter, clearly utilizing the cheap off-peak services he now had to rely on since my financial support ended. His clothes looked slightly worn, and he completely lacked the arrogant, wealthy posture he used to carry when I was blindly funding his comfortable lifestyle. He spotted us immediately. A flash of desperate recognition crossed his aging face. He took a hesitant step forward, attempting to initiate a conversation with an incredibly awkward, forced smile. It was painstakingly obvious he was trying to smooth over the permanent fracture, desperately hoping to manipulate his way back into my wallet and restore the lost financial aid. He opened his mouth, raising his hand slightly as if expecting a joyful family reunion. He actually muttered my name, his voice carrying a pathetic begging tone that I had never heard from him before. I did not say a single word. I did not stop walking, nor did I break my stride. I simply tightened my grip securely around Peyton's small hand, kept my head held high, and decisively walked right past him. I looked directly through his tired eyes as if I were gliding past a complete insignificant stranger in the busy crowd. I felt absolutely no guilt, no lingering obligation, and zero desire to ever look back. He was no longer my father. He was just a consequence of his own terrible choices left behind in the cold while we moved forward. Looking at my daughter's carefree smile today, I deeply understand that this entire nightmare left behind some crucial life-saving values. Bloodline and genetics do not define a true family. Mutual respect and the fierce willingness to protect one another form the only real core. When you consciously choose to tolerate evil and endure abuse under the false guise of maintaining family peace, you are actively stripping away your own child's fundamental right to safety. Building an ironclad boundary and permanently cutting off toxic individuals is never an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate non-negotiable responsibility of a mother to shield her vulnerable child from those who refuse to offer basic human decency. We found our absolute peace only after I finally decided to burn that toxic bridge to the ground. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story until the very final moments. I truly appreciate everyone's continued companionship and support throughout this journey. What do you think about my absolute decision to refuse forgiveness and permanently cut them off at the ski resort lobby? Please share your honest thoughts and perspectives down in the comments section below.